Hello everybody, today I wanted to do something similar to a couple of other videos I've done before where I go through the process I made or that I used to make my songs, this time focusing on Sunset Cruise. Um, if you haven't listened to it, the video is going to be available on my channel and the audio on my SoundCloud. The SoundCloud's already available. I'm going to have to redo the video on my YouTube because I used a different synthesizer for the melody. That's down here. And so the old version is going to be up. I'm going to be putting it unlisted, but it'll still be available. So if you want to listen to the original synthesizer that I used, I'm going to put a link down that into the description of this video so that you can listen to it, the original one. But I much prefer the newer version, and from the feedback I've heard from a couple of friends of mine that I trust their judgment, they also agree the new version is better. So with that being said, if you have not yet listened to the song, go give it a listen. You can listen to the original one on my SoundCloud, which I will put the link in the description as well. But I'm going to go ahead and jump straight into the chorus here. Just play it a little bit so you can get a feel for this song. It's a slower song in the vein of songs by like The Midnight mostly. I've been listening to him a lot lately. His stuff is great. If you like kind of chill music that's synth wavy and 80s and feel good type stuff. So here's what the melody and really what the theme of the song sounds like. So there you go. Alright, cool. We're still recording. Just making sure. It's been a while since I've done a recording. I wanted to separate the audio from my microphone from the audio on the video just to make things a little bit more clean in the video editing process. Anyways, so I'm going to go ahead and start with how I almost always start all of my projects. I have a single, where is it? A single track right here that I name whatever, and I just kind of mess around with it until everything sounds right. So I'm going to also open up the mixer here and turn a couple of things off. I'm going to turn the kickstart off on that, pop over to the pattern. So here is what the root sounded like when I was making the song. You'll hear the main harmony, if you will, playing in a higher octave, which you actually hear over here in harmony octave. But this is what the original root track sounded like that I kind of used and worked off. So yeah, it's a like I said, it's an upbeat song. So I originally started this with just the pad that plays in the background, which I'm using Tal Lx V2 or Tal or whatever you want to call it. Created a custom preset, but it's a pretty basic preset. Uh, Not a whole lot going on here, and then I played these chords, which if you want to see what they are, there's a little bit going on in here. Originally they had 6 notes, but I cut it down to 5 just to clean it up a little bit more. If I remember the process correctly, I was using a unison MIDI pack for chords, and then I just kind of manipulated them a little bit more, changed the timing up so that some of them fire off before the downbeat of the next bar for these two. And so you get these, which you'll recognize from the intro to the song. And then I loop it. I've got a looping set up in FL just to make my life easier so I don't have to copy and paste a million things. And then from there, I had the Serum Plucky bass, which I use in a lot of my songs. And that sounds like this. And together, they kind of formed the meat of the song, minus the drums, of course. And then once I had that down, I went ahead and added in the drums and turned on a sidechain using Kickstart. Kickstart I don't think is free. I think it's about like $5 to $8 right now. Might be 10. I don't know. Kickstart, simple sidechain. So instead of having the Pluck bass play on every single, I think it's eighth notes at this point. It doesn't matter. Instead of playing at that, it cancels the every odd note, if you will. So it goes. And the reason for that is because whenever you turn on the kicks, you will hear the kicks play, and we didn't want the bass to be overpowering with the low end of the kick. Plus, it just makes it have a little bit more bounce whenever you have the sidechain turned on with the drums. So it goes like this. And then, of course, it's just a very basic kick snare rhythm. And the kicks, if I remember correctly, they also get sidechained on the second kick, or every even kick turns it down by 25%, looks like. So instead of it having the same impact every single time, it's a little bit softer when the snares play, just so that the snares pop out a little bit more, and again, we're not blowing out the mastering. And then from there, I went into, I believe this is Harmless or Harmer. I always get the two confused. This is, let me just pop open the, I think it's F8. Harmless. Cool. This is Harmless. And I'm using a preset that they have inside of Harmless under the keyboard's 80s keys for the harmony, but this is playing an octave higher than it does most of the song. And it's just a very basic kind of sustained notes as it shows on the screen. Intentionally it's doing that because I was listening to a lot of synthwave videos and stuff like that, and they were kind of going over, synthwave tends to have more sustained notes and chords, which is why I actually manipulated a lot of the chords that I used from the Unison pack. You'll see, like right here, you've got the G sharp and the F sustained, and even the G sharp goes one further, and then the D sharp and the C gets sustained a little bit more. And then let's see if there's anything more. I mean, technically the G sharp gets sustained over here just by octaves. And then are there any other sustained notes? Not really. But in the melody here, it's just real simple, real short, real sweet. Let me turn it on first. Variation here, because if we played the same 4 bars over and over, it'd get old pretty fast. And then just to add a little bit more punch, these only kick in once the melody comes in, but the original idea was the whole loop was going to sound something like this. And while that sounds pretty good and pretty familiar, I've learned from a lot of my friends that my songs are too repetitive. This one's probably not too much different, but there are a lot of subtle changes, and you will actually see that if we pop over to the master track. I have a lot of different tracks going on here. You'll see that there's, how many Tal chord versions are there? There's 2 Tal chords. 1, 2. Yep, 2 versions of the Tal chords, where you'll notice the main difference in this one is that the Tal chords number 2 is just the same series of chords that we had in the root that just repeat. But the original Tal chords, I duplicated and had the ending fall down instead of going back up. So that sounds like this. which kind of gives it a little bit more variation is the wrong word, but it kind of like instead of just having it go back up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down like an insane person would keep, it kind of ends on a nice note here. It's like on almost a period at the end of a sentence, but it leaves it open to coming back up. So, and then that plays and loops, and we kick in the Serum Pluck bass, which is literally the same thing the entire damn song. I don't change it once throughout the song until we get to the very end where I just sustain the note. The one thing I do change is the kickstart, the sidechain. That turns on when the drums are on, turns off in the break, and then turns back on for the rest of the song. So yeah. And then I've got a little snare intro right here, which is just, well, it's better if I just play it. So that's just the snare intro in case you're wondering there. The harmony, like I said, I changed it from the upper notes. There it is. From these notes, which let me solo it, which is an octave higher than you'll hear in this one. And the reason for that change was a couple of different instruments were all playing in the high range. The Tal Chords were playing in the high range as well as the low range, or the mid range. And when I was making the root, I actually had the original chords in this octave, but it didn't sound too good. It sounded very muddy because there's a lot of stuff going on. But ultimately, I had to make the change back down from the upper octave whenever I added in the lead, which I changed a couple times. So in the original song, I was using a flex preset. I have deleted it from this version of the project, but I can't recall, or it wasn't flex preset. It was either I went through Flex. I tried using Tal. I think I also went through Silent One. I think Silent One was the plugin I used originally for the main lead. But I ended up finding my USB key for Nexus, which is why the current version of the song is using a Nexus preset, which is a saxophone that I quite enjoy because a lot of the saxophone VSTs, synthesizers, and recordings, they're good, but it's they all kind of fall flat. There's a lot of stuff you have to do to them to make them punch out. Whereas this one, Drunken Monkey, which is part of the expansion Dance 3, is just, I think it's brilliant all around. I like it a lot. There's still stuff you have to do to it to make it sound like I have in the song, and I'll go through all of the different tracks and show you the different filters and mastering stuff that I've done on them. But for the melody, you get this nice little echoey, high reverb, a bit of delay, and then I think maybe there's a sound goodizer on it, but that's it. So here's what the melody and the saxophone sounds like. Or if I turn, it would help if I turned everything back on. There we go. And another really big reason that I like this version of this of the saxophone versus other VSTs is that you probably heard it at the very end of these sustained notes, like right here and right here. They add a little bit of vibrato in as the notes being sustained, which helps bring the saxophone to life. So I'll turn all that back off. So I will go ahead and dive into each of these presets and how I made them using the mastering and all the rest of that jazz. So let's jump in with the Tal Chords. So Tal is I think it's free, or if it's not free, it's pretty cheap, but I believe it was free when I used it. I actually ended up saving this preset just so that I could use it later on in future tracks if I want to. But essentially what I've got is I've got the LFO thing here set to the envelope. I've got LFO itself, the low frequency oscillator turned up a little bit, so You can hear the little bit of distortion in the background. I've got the sub oscillator turned on, but it actually turns off right here at bar 9 when the bass picks up. So if I pop over here now, you'll see that it's off versus because the intro I didn't want to. It needed to be a bit more lush because there wasn't the bass line in the background to fill out that low end. So I wanted to have that turned on until the bass line came in. Other than that, the VCF envelope is a little bit below half. The frequency is also a little bit below half. The resonance is turned all the way down. Level and tune didn't really get changed at all. The VCA is set to envelope instead of gate. There's a softer attack, but it's not soft, but it's not like harsh. So it just kind of turns on. There is a bit of a decay, as you can actually see if I turn this up and you can see how it kind of falls out. But there is still a sustain on it. And then the release is set pretty high, as you can hear whenever I just tap it. The LFO rate, I don't think I changed anything here. I do have both choruses turned on, because if you turn them off, it's not as good. It's very flat. And then the arpeggio is turned off, and the rest of the stuff is all turned off. And then we pop over to the master track, and there's only one thing on here, and it's a filter, which cuts off the low and the high ends, which I use right here after as the build up and the drop happens for the verse. So drums kick in, and I just sort of fade out the bass line, or not the bass line, but the low end and the high end of the Tal chords. I slowly start to mute them. I also kind of drop the volume down really high, or from the volume you have here to about halfway, and then it builds back up as the chorus comes in, which is where we get the Tal arp for the first time, and we'll go into that one next, because I forgot to go over it. But you'll see that, like I said, the mix level for the parametric equalizer turns on right here, and as it turns on, we slowly turn that high-end frequency down a little bit, and then we take that low-end frequency and we just bring it all the way up. So if we watch what happens in the song, you can actually see these move along with the rest of it. And if we turn all the rest of the instruments off as we listen to this, you'll hear the actual effect that happens. It gets softer. And then it keeps like that until we get back to the main part of the song. So, there's not a whole lot going on with these chords right here, other than the change in the pattern going on between just repeating the same first 4 chords and then also having the alternating ending on the Tal Chords version 1. So the second thing I wanted to talk about is this Tal arp. It is not quite a default arpeggio that you can use from any of the ones that I used, because it starts on the 3rd instead of the root note, and so I had to manually enter all of this because I didn't want to lose my damn mind trying to get everything done. And then you'll also see it skips certain notes, so like goes C sharp, G sharp, C sharp, G sharp instead of stopping at this F. This is using a preset that I kind of loosely modeled on the one of the synthesizers in Carpenter Britt's track Looking for Tracy Zoo, hence the name. And so the ARP sounds like this. And then it loops from there. And you can very well hear the minor 3rd set of chords right here. And the whole song is meant to be upbeat, but obviously if the whole song's happy the entire time, there's no real impact with each of the new chord changes. So sure, someone who knows a little bit more about music theory than I do, the actual theory of it would be able to explain why, but I just did it because it sounds nice and it sounds right. Um, I don't know if there's too much going on. Yeah, the Tal ARP has nothing going on in the filters, so it's just it's straight up and clean like that. The Serum Pluck bass. This one's gonna be the fun one because there's a bit going into it. So obviously the notes themselves are just the straight bass note with the sidechain. But there is a bit more going on behind the scenes with the instrument and the filters. So if I go over to the filters and turn everything off, you will hear what just the VST sounds like, which isn't bad, and it's pretty damn close to what we wanted, or what I wanted. But I still had to make a bit of work for that, so there's only one oscillator, but I do have the sub turned on. The sub is also a saw wave down to 2 octaves versus the 1 octave here. The only difference between this one and that one is this oscillator has a unison of 7 and it's a moderate detune. It's not too high. This one is just the straight sub, and it's 2 octaves down. And we do have the filter using the LFO curve here to change the cutoff on the filter. We've got it set to MG low 12, which is causing that pluck sound. It's a trick I learned from the Deadmau5 masterclass. He straight up showed us how to do it. So if you want more on his type of music, that would be a good way to learn through his masterclass. Anyways, there is a bit more, or there normally is going a bit more going on in the filter and FX tabs here, but I didn't want to mess around with this one too much because as it was right here, it was pretty close to what I wanted. So I just needed to add more stereo width and then that side change. So the stereo width comes in with this plugin here, which is actually free. It's the Talcorus Lx. It's basically the same thing you see in the other plugin that I used, V2. It's this part right here, but it's just got a little bit more controls to it, and you can put it on any plugin you want, not just a Tal plugin. So when that's turned on, we get that stereo width. If I can find my master track, there we go. So if you can hear the difference between the two, good on you. You're wearing headphones. If you can't, you're listening on speakers, which is not a bad thing, but it's a little bit more effective on headphones because you get the left and right audio going to your left and right ears. Anyways, so after that, obviously we had the sidechain, which is the kickstart. Very basic. And I actually thought this was going to be more complex because I thought I had more going on in the Serum plugin itself, but it turns out I was wrong. So I'm glad for that. This is a very simple plugin. So we've gone through the ARP, we've gone through the chords, we've gone through the pluck bass, the drums. The pattern is simple. The mastering is a little bit more complicated, but not too much. Let me pull up the pattern here. It's literally just a kick snare being repeated just over and over and over again on our root note of C, because this is in C major if I recall. Or it's not in C major, but the kick and snare fits within the song on C, so I left it. I normally have this routed like this, where I've got a single track that has all of the drums, the kick routes into the drums track, and the snare routes into the drums track, and then that way if I wanted to change the sound of all the drums, I can do that, but I've also got individual tracks for the kick and the snare. So, as I mentioned before, the kick has a sidechain that kind of softens the every other kick that happens to make room for the snare and the bass pluck as well. But there's other than that, there is a equalizer going on here, which is not doing a whole lot, but it is what it is doing. It is doing it effectively. I raised the low end, cut off the mid, and then raised up a little bit of the high mid for the kick, so that it doesn't get as muddy. So if I play the C versus what it sounds like stock, we're getting rid of that clicky noise, but it still has that full sound. And then the snare. The only thing I've done with the snare is add this vintage or Valhalla Vintage Verb, which is a reverb plugin. It's pretty good. Credit to Steve Ingham, I believe is how you pronounce his name. He's a great channel. He recommended this plugin, and so without the reverb, the snare sounds like this, which is it's already a pretty good snare. But then with the reverb turned on, it gets that nice reverb echoey sound that we needed so desperately, because reverb on a snare drum was a brilliant idea that was a mistake from the 80s. But we end up with a very simple. Nothing too strange about that. No hats in this song because it's meant to be a slower track, and hats are usually used in faster tracks. So there's not a whole lot going on there. And then all of my tracks route into a single track here, just in case I need, because I like to limit my tracks before they go to the master one. And then the master track also has its own limiter. And then I've got the Wave Candy, that's this thing, and then my video editor, which we don't need to get into because it's an entirely different topic for another day. So we've gone through the drums. Now we go over the harmony. The harmony, like I said, is using Harmless, I believe. And it's just using the 80s keys preset. And then, there it is. Clean plugin, no changes. Gets plugged into the melody track for whatever reason. So it's just straight up these notes being played on 80s keys. Nothing too fancy going on there. Which brings us to the final part of the song. Well, actually, let me dip into these monsters. So, these are the variations of the harmony, and then you can see that in the background I've got the full bucket 3100 or FB 3100 mirroring the harmony with a few slight variations, like this note goes up instead of staying flat like the rest of it. It's just a little chime that happens in the background to give a little bit more emphasis on the beginning of each note in the harmony, but it's also higher and it's chime, so it has a bit more width to it. So if I pop over to this and turn it on. Y'all get the idea. Nothing's going on with the full bucket 3100. Well, actually there is. There's a parametric EQ, but I think this is using the radio preset from the mastering, if I recall correctly. Oh, apologies for the yawn. So yeah, there's that, and the melody is using, as I mentioned before, it is using the Nexus preset Drunken Monkey from the XP Dance 3. Now I did have to do a little bit to this one to make it just right. There's another song on my Spotify called Faceless, and it's using a similar process. I've got a sound goodizer, a delay, and a vintage reverb. So the sound goodizes the sound. Not entirely sure exactly what it's doing, but without all of these, the saxophone sounds like this. Let me jump over to the melody preset real quick, and then pop over to here so we can hear what it sounds like whenever everything's turned off. Already pretty close. The sound goodizer gives a little bit more emphasis on the high end now that I've listened to it. The delay is kind of the big one for this because I don't really know how to explain it. It's just the delay on this saxophone gives the depth and the feeling, in my opinion. And it also kind of gives a bit of a call and response feel to it. And the vintage verb just adds a little bit more depth to it. Not a whole lot more going on there. And then all together, we get this. So So yeah, that is Sunset Cruise. Overall, it's a fairly simple song, but I think that for what I was intending, it is effective, and for how little work I actually had to put into it to get the song sounding the way I wanted it to, I am quite proud of it. It's nowhere near the level of complexity as something like Night Ride or Stardust, for that matter, um, or even Retribution, which is kind of an experiment of mine that I was using trying to get more of a dark synth feeling to my songs. But hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments, and I will do my best to answer them. Um, if there's enough support for it, I will look at putting up the Tal presets into a Dropbox. And I actually ended up making a patch for the where'd it go? For the melody here, the Nexus. So if I go over to patcher, here we go. Presets, monkey. You will see that it is literally the same thing. MIDI into Nexus, which is running the Drunken Monkey preset, up to the Soundgoodizer, into the Fruity Delay, into the Vintage Verb, and out to FL Studio. The only difference is right here, I can't change the Soundgoodizer directly, so I did not keep that in this song because the Soundgoodizer can be a bit overpowering sometimes. But yeah, like I said, if there's enough demand, I will put the presets for these two bad boys, the ARP and the chords. I will put them on like a, I don't know, GitHub, Dropbox, Pastebin, Patchbay, I don't know, who knows. I'll figure it out. And then if there's more demand for tutorials and stuff like that, or videos going over my other songs, I will do that as well. So hopefully you enjoyed, and I guess I will see y'all in the next video.